Mickey Pondle from Explore Asheville. How did you make it from Northern Virginia to Western North Carolina?
Like a lot of people that end up moving to the Asheville area, I started off as a visitor to Asheville. I came here in around this time of year in spring 2017, and it was so different from any place I had ever been. I mean, I basically grew up in Northern Virginia, went to school in DC, lived in DC for a while, and so I knew about like big cities, unending suburbs, and then like the country, rural areas. But I'd never been somewhere like Asheville where like there is an urban downtown, but it's really small. There's kind of a small town feel. And then, you go 2 minutes in one direction and you're in the mountains. It feels like you're in the middle of nowhere and you haven't even left the city limits. And yeah, I was just really intrigued by the great arts culture that's here and the feeling of community. And yeah, I ended up just getting a job. It was all supposed to be temporary, and 8 years later, here I am.
The temporary, eventual, or long-living place. So how long have you been here in Nashville?
So I've been here going on 8 years now, which is crazy to say out loud.
And tell us more about what you do.
Right. So I am a PR, a public relations manager for Explore Asheville, and that means I deal with media, primarily travel media, publications like Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast, Afar, but also, National Geographic, any type of story that's doing a destination piece on the Asheville area. They might be writing about our food scene or outdoor adventure or, the 12 best hotels in Asheville, or they just unveiled a new Black Heritage Cultural Trail, and any number of things. So that's what I do.
So you get to travel and explore all of these things, I would assume.
So I've been working for Explore Asheville for about 4 years now. And before then, I had a passing knowledge of Asheville restaurants. Maybe I knew about Chai Pani, and I came downtown like once a week maybe. But shortly after working there, I got a deep knowledge of just about every new and existing hotel, restaurant, attraction. So yeah, I legitimately am a good tour guide for people now. So that's been cool.
With the responsibilities that Explore Asheville has to get people to Asheville, how is that happening after Helene? What are you doing to stimulate?
My organization, Explore Asheville, which is technically known as the BCTDA, the Buncombe County Tourism Development Authority, we're an organization that is funded by a lodging tax that everybody pays if they're staying in a hotel, short-term rental, any kind of overnight lodging in Buncombe County. And the TDA was created decades ago by the North Carolina State Legislature. That's the legal authority under which we operate as state law. And so we are legally obligated to pay 2/3 of our revenue towards promoting Buncombe County as a destination for overnight visitors. And the remaining third we spend on community projects. And so, our job was fairly straightforward, I would say, before Hurricane Helene. I mean, our imperatives at that time were dispersal, right? So we were focused on actually moving people out of the downtown core so that they could visit places like Fairview, Weaverville, Black Mountain, put a little bit less pressure on that small downtown, and also dispersing them throughout the seasons, right? So that there was less of a fallow period in winter and there wasn't so much pressure on fall and spring. So basically we were focused on kind of over tourism as a development. And after Helene, the whole thing just flipped because there was wall-to-wall media coverage for weeks of Asheville as a disaster zone. And the footage was real. There really were trees down and cars going down the river and people's homes and businesses destroyed. But there was also a lot of areas like downtown where I live, lots of other places that were kind of barely touched.
Right.
And so those places opened back up for business pretty soon after the storm, a lot of them before we even had water back in the city of Asheville. And so it was this odd dynamic where even as so many people were still struggling and trying to figure out what the next move is, we were also hearing from numerous business owners like, you need to get the visitors back because we just missed our peak season of September and October. We're about to go into the slow season of winter. And so, it was definitely trying to walk that tightrope between giving space to those areas that are hurting and that are going to need time to recover, and those people that need visitors back immediately, and trying to promote people towards those areas.
That's something that I had heard. It was that a lot of businesses, specifically downtown, were starved for tourism. Come back, we're open.
A lot of businesses, and that runs the gamut from hotels to attractions like the Biltmore Estate, restaurants, they really rely on that peak fall season when people come in to see the gorgeous color that surrounds these mountains. We have one of the longest leaf seasons in the year because with the difference in elevation of the mountains, the leaves change at the top much quicker than the bottom. And so you can actually be here for like 6-7 weeks and see the color just move down. And so a lot of businesses rely on that time to get them through the much more fallow periods. And so with that being lost, a lot of places didn't make it, but a lot of places did. And now that we're moving into spring, I'm optimistic that, if a business was able to make it through this winter, I think they're going to be okay because people are starting to come back now.
So I'm interested to learn, Mickey, you said that about 2/3 or exactly 2/3 of your budget comes from overnight stays and tourism. So the short-term rentals versus hotels, we were talking offset a little bit ago about short-term rentals not necessarily being affected, and then they are affected, and compare and contrast that for me again.
Over the past 5 or 10 years, the major trend we've been seeing, one of the major trends is an explosion in the popularity of short-term rentals in Buncombe County. The overall number of visitors and the overall amount of visitor spend has rapidly increased in the past 5 years or so, but hotel availability has stayed roughly the same. And the reason for that discrepancy, again, is this massive increase in short-term rentals. And this was really accelerated by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. In 2020 and 2021, people wanted out of big cities. The idea of being on a mountaintop somewhere with lots of space, right? Lots of space to possibly work remote or go for a long walk. That was very appealing to everyone. And that's really when we saw short-term rentals take off in Buncombe County. What's interesting is that with the hurricane, hotel occupancy has obviously been hit, but it has been greatly mitigated by the fact that so many first responders and residents who lost their homes are staying in hotels. And this is being paid for by FEMA and other federal and state agencies. And that is not the case with short-term rentals. FEMA is not paying for people to stay in Airbnbs, right? These are places that are entirely driven by the leisure market, or in some cases, business travel, people coming here for small conferences and stuff. But in any case, we've really seen in these last couple months the short-term rental occupancy crash. And so one of our imperatives as the tourism board right now is to try and encourage and drive people back towards those short-term rentals because we know they're really hurting right now.
I don't know, about maybe a year ago, I was asked to be part of an STR Alliance, short-term rental alliance here in Buncombe County, and give some data and background on short-term rentals and how they support the community. And our big crying, screaming from the mountaintops, if you will, voice of reason was data integrity. And you were talking about that a little bit with the housing affordability, and it sounded like I kind of coached you on what to say, but I promised you I did not.
No.
Can you go over that for me again?
I recall what you're talking about. It was about a year ago, and there was this ordinance floated in Buncombe County to basically put a moratorium or a ban on short-term rentals. And the reason for this outcry is that, like many other places in the country, Asheville is in the midst of a housing crisis. And housing is something that we talk a lot about at Explore Asheville, not least of which because all of us there actually are from here and live in Asheville, and we know about the housing crisis firsthand, right? And the bottom line is that short-term rentals are not the cause of the housing crisis. Not at all. The cause of the housing crisis mainly is an issue of supply and demand. What happened in the Asheville area and a lot of areas is that after the financial crisis in 2008, construction really stopped. And it took a long time for it to get going. And even after it got going again, it was nowhere near enough to compete with the demand, the number of people moving here. And this is housing across the spectrum. This is low-income housing. This is, small homes that might be people's starter homes. This is big mansions. I mean, every layer of housing, we were just in short supply. And that's the reason why rents keep going up and housing prices keep going up. Short-term rentals are a very, very small percentage of the housing stock in Buncombe County. Very small. What they do allow for is for many residents to make money off of the tourism industry, which is the biggest industry in Buncombe County, by renting out a room in their house or a suite above their garage or a property that they bought in Fairview or wherever. So that was our argument, basically, was that, there's a perception out there because you might live in a neighborhood where there's an Airbnb down the street and you think, wow, what shouldn't that house be available for someone else to move into? It's much harder, even if you show them data, like you said, to really feel like it's not the problem.
Yeah, I can vouch for that with, my relationships in the lending industry and real estate as a whole, dating back to October of 98. There was a huge buildup all the way up to 2008 with construction, and housing was just continuing to be really robust. Lending standards were poor, ergo the crash. And then for, what is this now, 17 years, 18 years thereafter, you have a scenario where there's been a consistent, over a 55-year, 57-year trend. For the last 17 years, it's been below the norm, below the median of new construction, and the supply-demand curve is way out of balance. So it's going to be something that's going to take quite a bit of time for people to, especially with, I think right now is about 4.2 or 4.3 million real estate transactions are expected to happen in the U.S. in 2025, at least according to Gary Keller.
And it's not even just new construction. We also have a dynamic of aging in place. And now frequently, grandma and grandpa are not going to another home. We have them staying at home. We have home health care and nursing. So they're staying in their homes longer than they traditionally did. And it's just exacerbating that housing crisis, which you're right, is happening in a lot of places.
Yeah.
Asheville is no different than our hometown in Northeast Ohio. Yeah. It's the same story, not enough housing, and then prices are being driven up. And then there's the catch-22 with that thought of, well, if this house were not an Airbnb and it were available for a family, and then what happens if tourism declines and you don't have enough available inventory for visitors to come stay, then that hurts the businesses, and then you don't want to go that direction either.
That's a
conundrum.
really good point, because like I was saying, the demand that we are seeing, especially in a more rural area like Asheville, is for short-term rentals. So that's where the tourism industry is growing here. And tourism is, it definitely, there is such a thing as over-tourism, right? Like Venice is too crowded. The Great Pyramids in Egypt, people are crawling all over them. There's like vendors hawking, like tourism is something that should be regulated and planned and have intention behind it from a public policy level. But all of that being said, tourism is kind of the perfect way to stimulate your economy because you're getting outside dollars coming in, right? People are paying taxes and they're buying goods and buying services, and then they're going home. They're not actually enjoying the roads and the healthcare and the police and all of those things that our taxes pay for.
Sure.
We did an analysis that figured out that, if there was no lodging tax in Buncombe County, the average family would be paying like $4,000 more in taxes each year to enjoy the same level of public services. So, again, it's easy to be mad at your favorite little restaurant being too crowded or not being able to find a parking spot or whatever. But we really saw after the hurricane, when everything really was zeroed out, people really saw firsthand what happened when the base of our economy collapsed. And there was a general feeling of, oh no, we don't want an economic disaster to follow this natural disaster. And so there has been a lot of general support for us and for bringing back the visitors, despite the, complicated feelings of locals from even just 6 months ago.
You just had Good Morning America at
We
the
did.
brewery this.
Yeah.
What was that, Thursday? Yeah.
It was just on Thursday. Yep. I waved in Robin Roberts' car coming into the parking lot. It pulled up in a black SUV, tinted windows like the president. It was really cool. Yeah. Good Morning America has been to Asheville a couple times over the last couple of years. In fact, the last time they were here was just right after I got the job at Explore Asheville. I remember them filming at the Biltmore Estate. This time around, they contacted us maybe about a month before they came in town, and they were here to mark the 6-month anniversary of the hurricane, and they were adamant that they wanted to focus not so much on the destruction and the tragedy, but on all of the progress that's been made, the community resilience, nonprofits like Beloved Asheville that have been doing incredible work. Really, truly saving lives, getting people connected with food and housing and all of the resources that people didn't have after the storm. And so we were able to connect with them early on, tell them about important local establishments that we thought were important for them to connect with, like Highland Brewing, where they ended up shooting, the godfather of the craft beer scene in Asheville. And also places that are maybe less known, like Guajiro, which is an amazing Cuban restaurant that they were a food truck for a long time. They had just gotten a brick and mortar place in the River Arts District.
Oh, no.
It was beautiful. It was so airy and bright, and the food was delicious, and the whole family worked there, and it was completely wiped out. No chance of rebuilding, which really, really sucks. But very quickly they got another food truck, went back to their roots, went to Highwire Brewing, which is a brewery that opened up pretty quickly after the storm in Biltmore Village, which is another neighborhood that was really hard hit.
Yeah.
So Good Morning America was able to go in and profile Guajiro, the owners, drive business to them, which is not a place that has the vast resources of the Biltmore Estate or a big restaurant. And so that's the part of my job that I really like, is lifting up small businesses, entrepreneurs that are just getting started, people that don't have a big marketing team or a public relations team, but they do have amazing stories that I know journalists want to tell, and being able to connect them and have those stories told.
But that's a pretty cool story you just told right there. Two very different ends of the spectrum. Thanks for sharing those. A distinctive approach to passive income with luxury vacation rentals.
For more information, check out our website, quinvestors.com.
So explore Asheville, and it may sound odd. You guys did make some gutsy moves right after Helene.
Yeah.
So you had to move some money around, and you have to make sure, it's taxpayer money. It's very important that you handle it the right way, fiscally responsible.
Yeah, exactly. We are a public entity funded by taxpayers and operating within fairly narrow strictures of the North Carolina state government. So it's not like we typically make big financial moves. Most of that stuff has to go through our board, and it's a very long kind of bureaucratic process. But to the great credit, I think, of our CEO, Vic Isley, who in the past has worked in places like Bermuda, where natural disasters and specifically hurricanes happen a lot. She worked in D.C. after 9/11, which was a very different kind of, imagine, working in D.C. tourism after 9/11. You can imagine that took a hit. So anyway, she did something really cool, which was put together a completely new, basically, revenue stream for local businesses. We called it the Always Asheville Fund. We were able to seed it with $200,000 of our budget, which, again, normally would be allocated towards marketing, TV advertising, event sponsorship, anything like that. But this was a way to sort of very quickly directly get money in businesses' coffers, because, as we know, FEMA aid and other things like that can be very slow if it comes at all. The other thing that was happening was that we were hearing from business owners who had basically disaster insurance. This is something that restaurants and other places who are completely dependent on hospitality purchase, precisely so that if something like this happens, if some kind of act of God happens that completely cuts off the spigot of visitation, they will not be entirely zeroed out. They will get some kind of payout. But the thing is, a lot of the insurance companies were fighting it. They weren't paying it out. They were saying, you got damage from wind, not rain, or rain, not wind. And So businesses were really struggling.
So Always Asheville launched into some event. Tell us about that.
Pretty much right after we launched the Always Asheville Fund, we heard from Luke Combs and Eric Church, who are two big country stars, and they're both from North Carolina. Luke Combs is from Asheville. He went to Reynolds High School right down the road, and he went to Appalachian State, which is a college in Boone, about an hour north of Asheville. So Luke and Eric both really wanted to do something to help their home state, and they came up with this Concert for Carolina idea. This would be a big benefit concert.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was huge. It generated nearly $25 million. Bank of America Stadium donated their space. All of the food and drink vendors donated their profits. They were constantly promoting online giving and other ways of giving during the concert. So all in all, it raised about $25 million. And this was split between Luke and Eric, who had both designated one or a handful of nonprofits in the area that were giving out assistance. And so that, as far as gutsy moves goes, good on us for creating the fund, but really good on Luke and Eric for very quickly putting together this big event. And after that, Eric Church has a song called Carolina that's all about feeling drawn to this area, his state, calling him home. And this is something we talk about in Asheville a lot, is that, when you first see those mountains after visiting somewhere else, there is kind of this deep breath moment. So many people talk about being drawn to these mountains. I felt drawn to these mountains. And so he actually donated the rights of this song to us so that we could use it in TV ads and other forms of promotion. So we were able to, call people home to the Blue Ridge Mountains. And that was really special.
We often have this, what's your favorite place to go conversation. And I'm a mountain guy and she's a beach gal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty great to be in the mountains, just even after seeing on our way in, the border areas of Tennessee, crossing into North Carolina and going over these highways that have just been reconstructed. It's crazy to see the devastation, and it's invigorating to see the restoration and the people coming together and all of the things that you just mentioned happening. In fact, we just talked about it a moment ago with Good Morning America being here on Thursday. Right. And I think I remember them saying they brought $2.5 million in just that day.
They did. They were able to raise $2 million from different corporate sponsors. They gave a lady a new car because she had lost her car in the storm. So it was really special. And, in general, I mean, I have never lived through a natural disaster. Certainly in Asheville, we never expected a hurricane. We're 4 hours from the closest beach. But it happened, and that's the way these things go sometimes. And the silver lining has been to see the community come together. Even though, for example, so many artists lost their space in the River Arts District, immediately places began springing up in other areas. The old Moog factory downtown, Moog Synthesizers, has had this factory forever, and they moved out of it. And now it's, instead of selling the lot, which they were originally going to do, the landlords decided to turn it into a space called Resurrection Studios. And this is primarily housing artists who lost their space. Dozens of artists, painters, woodworkers are using this space. And it's a retail space, a gallery. So again, there are so many stories like this of, as devastating as the storm was, Appalachian culture has always been resilient. It's been about neighbors helping neighbors, and it's been really inspiring to see that after the storm.
Very true. Thanks for your time today, Mickey.
Thank you so much.